हेलो दोस्तों, बिगनर्स पॉइंट में आपका स्वागत है। और अभी हम कर रहे हैं इकोनॉमिक्स, ठीक है, जो कि है यूनिट नंबर 4, डेवलपमेंट एक्सपीरियंसेस ऑफ इंडिया, अ कंपैरिजन विद नेबर्स। नेबर के साथ क्या क्या कंपैरिजन है इसके, पाकिस्तान एंड चाइना। In today's globalized world, where geographical boundaries are slowly becoming meaningless, it is important for neighboring countries in the developing world to understand the development strategies being pursued by their neighbors. This is more so because they share the relatively limited economic space in world markets. In this unit, we will compare India's developmental experiences with two of its important and strategic neighbors, Pakistan and China. अब आ जाते हैं चैप्टर नंबर 8, मतलब इसी का यूनिट का ही पार्ट है, कंपैरेटिव डेवलपमेंट एक्सपीरियंसेस ऑफ इंडिया एंड इट्स नेबर्स। Geography has made us neighbors, history has made us friends, economics has made us partners, and necessity has made us allies. Those whom God has so joined together, let no man put asunder. John Faraday Kennedy. Introduction. In the preceding units, we studied the developmental experiences of India in detail. We also studied the kind of policies India adopted, which had varying impacts in different sectors. Over the last 2 decades or so, the economic transformation that is taking place in different countries across the world, partly because of the process of globalization, has both short as well as long-term implications for each country, including India. Nations have been primarily trying to adopt various means which will strengthen their own domestic economies. To this effect, they are forming regional and global economic groupings such as the SAARC, European Union, Asian G8, G20, BRICS, etc. In addition, there is also an increasing eagerness. Eagerness मतलब क्या होता है? चलजनेट, उत्सुकता, on the parts of various nations to try and understand the developmental processes pursued by their neighboring nations as it allows them to better comprehend their own strengths and weaknesses. Their neighbors in the unfolding process of globalization. This is particularly considered essential by developing countries as they face competition not only from developed nations but also amongst themselves in the relatively limited economic space enjoyed by the developing world. Besides, an understanding of the other economies in our neighborhood is also required, as all major common economic activities in the region impinge. मतलब क्या हो जाएगा इसका, impinge on overall human development in shared environment. In this chapter, we will compare the developmental strategies pursued by India and the largest two of its neighboring economies, Pakistan and China. It has to be remembered that despite being endowed with vast natural resources, there is little similarity between the political power setup of India, the largest democracy of the world, which is wedded to a secular and deeply liberal constitution for more than half of half a century, and the militarist political power structure of Pakistan, or the command economy of China that has only recently started moving towards a democratic system and more liberal economic restructuring, respectively. Developmental path, snapshot view. Do you know that India, Pakistan, and China have many similarities in their developmental strategies? All the three nations have started toward their developmental path at the same time. While India and Pakistan became independent nations in 1947, People's Republic of China was established in 1949. In a speech at that time, Jawaharlal Nehru had said, "These new and revolutionary changes in China and India, even though they differ in content, symbolize the new spirit of Asia and new vitality which is finding expression in the countries in Asia." All three countries had started planning their developmental strategies in similar ways. While India announced its first 5 year plan for 1951 to 56, Pakistan announced its first 5 year plan, now called the Medium Term Development Plan, in 1956. China announced its first 5 year plan in 1953. Since 2018, Pakistan is working on the basis of 12th 5 year developmental plan 2018 to 23, whereas China is working on 14th 5 year plan 21 to 25. Until March 2017, India has been following 5 year plan based development model. India and Pakistan adopted similar strategies, such as creating a large public sector and raising public expenditure on social development. Till the 1980s, all the three countries had similar growth rates and per capita incomes. Where do they stand today in comparison to one another? Before we answer this question, let us trace the historical path of developmental policies in China and Pakistan. After studying the last three units, we already know what policies India has been adopting since its independence. China, after the establishment of People's Republic of China under one party rule, all critical sectors of the economy, enterprises, and lands owned and operated by individuals were brought under government control. The Great Leap Forward (GLF) campaign initiated in 1958 aimed at industrializing the country on a massive scale. People were encouraged to set up industries in their backyards. In rural areas, communes were started. Under the commune system, people collectively cultivated lands. In 1958, there were 26,000 communes covering almost all the farm population. GLF campaign met with many problems. A severe drought caused havoc in China, killing about 30 million people. When Russia had conflicts with China, it withdrew its professionals who had earlier been sent to China to help in the industrialization process. In 1965, Mao introduced the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, 1966 to 76, under which students and professionals were sent to work and learn from the countryside. The present day fast industrial growth in China can be traced back to the reforms introduced in 1978. China introduced reforms in phases. In the initial phase, reforms were initiated in agriculture, foreign trade, and investment sectors. In agriculture, for instance, commune lands were divided into small plots, which were allocated for use, not ownership, to individual households. They were allowed to keep all income forms from the land after paying stipulated taxes. In the later phase, reform were initiated in the industrial sector, private sector firms in general, and township and village enterprises, that is, those enterprises which were owned and operated by local collectives in particular, were allowed to produce goods. At this stage, enterprises owned by government, known as state-owned enterprises (SOE), which we in India call public sector enterprises, were made to face competition. The reform process also involved dual pricing. This means fixing the prices in two ways. First one is farmers and industrial units were required to buy and sell fixed quantities of inputs and outputs on the basis of prices fixed by the government, and the rest were purchased and sold at market prices. Over the years, as production increased, the proportion of goods or inputs transacted in the market also increased. In order to attract foreign investors, special economic zones were set up. Pakistan. While looking at various economic policies that Pakistan adopted, you will notice many similarities with India. Pakistan also follows the mixed economy model with coexistence of public and private sectors. In the late 1950s and 1960s, Pakistan introduced a variety of regulated policy framework for import substitution based industrialization. The policy combined tariff protection for manufacturing of consumer goods together with direct import controls on competing imports. The introduction of Green Revolution led to mechanization and increase in public investment in infrastructure in select areas, which finally led to a rise in the production of food grains. This changed the agrarian structure dramatically. In the 1970s, nationalization of capital goods industries took place. Pakistan then shifted its policy orientation in the late 1970s and 1980s when the major thrust areas were denationalization and encouragement of private sector. During this period, Pakistan also received financial support from Western nations and remittance from continuously increasing outflow of immigrants to the Middle East. This helped the country in stimulating economic growth. Then the then government also offered incentives to the private sector. All this created a conducive climate for new investments. In 1988, reforms were initiated in the country. Having studied a brief outline of the developmental studies of China and Pakistan, let us now compare some of the developmental indicators of China, India, and Pakistan. Demographic indicators. If we look at the global population, out of every six persons living in this world, one is an Indian and another an Chinese. We shall compare some demographic indicators of India, China, and Pakistan. The population of Pakistan is very small and accounts for roughly about one tenth of China or India. Though China is the largest nation and geographically occupies the largest area among the three nations, its density is the lowest. Table 8.1 shows the population growth has been the highest in Pakistan, followed by India and China. Table 8.1 select demographic indicators 2025 India estimated population 1412 annual growth of population 0.68 density 473 per square kilometer 69938 fertility rate 2 और urbanization 36 इसी के साथ चाइना 1417 पाकिस्तान 236 और इसमें कम हुई है 1.89 बढ़ी है 150 300 1900 कितना ही है 60 1959 1982 982 959 959 और 982 1.2 फर्टिलिटी रेट 3.4 अर्बनाइजेशन 65 और 38 Scholars point out the one child norm introduced in China in the late 1970s as the major reason for low population growth. They also state that this measure led to a decline in sex ratio, the proportion of females per 1000 males. However, from the table, you will notice that the sex ratio is low and biased against females in all three countries. Scholars cite son preference prevailing in all these countries as the reason. In recent times, all three countries are adopting various measures to improve the situation. One child norm and the resultant arrest in the growth of population also have other implications. For instance, after a few decades in China, there will be more elderly people in proportion to young people. This led China to allow couples to have two children. The fertility rate is also low in China and very high in Pakistan. Urbanization is high in China, with India having 36% of its people living in urban areas. Gross domestic product and sectors. One of the much talked issues around the world about China is its growth of gross domestic product. China has the second largest GDP (PPP) of $35 trillion in the world, whereas India's GDP is $15 trillion and Pakistan's GDP is 1.5 trillion, roughly about 10% of India's GDP. India's GDP is about 42% of China's GDP. When many developed countries were finding it difficult to maintain a growth rate of even 5%, China was able to maintain near double digit growth during 1980s as can be seen from table 8.2. Also notice that in the 1980s, Pakistan was ahead of India, China was having double digit growth and India was at the bottom. In 2015 to 17 and 2024 there has been a decline. पहले टेबल देख लेते हैं. इंडिया की 5.7 थी ग्रोथ, चाइना की 10.3, पाकिस्तान 6.3. 15 से 17 में 7.3, 6.8 और 5.3. 2022 में 7, 3 और 4.8. Pakistan and China's growth rates, whereas India met with moderate increase in growth rates. Some scholars hold the reform process introduced in Pakistan and political instability over a long period has reasons behind the declining growth rate in Pakistan. We will study in a later section which sector contributed to different growth rates in these countries. First, look at how people engaged in different sectors contribute to the gross domestic product, now called as gross value added. It was pointed out in the previous section that China and Pakistan have more proportion of urban population than India. In China, due to topographic and climatic conditions, the area suitable for cultivation is relatively small, only about 10% of its total land area. The total cultivable area in China accounts for 40% of the cultivatable area in India. Until 1980s, more than 80% of the people in China were dependent on farming as their sole source of livelihood. Since then, the government encouraged people to leave their fields and pursue other activities such as handicrafts, commerce, and transport. In 2021, with 23% of its workforce engaged in agriculture, its contribution to the GVA in China is 8%. See in table number 8.3. इंडस्ट्री इन चाइना एंड पाकिस्तान. ये कार व्हीकल मैन्युफैक्चरर है, ये देख लेना अपने हिसाब से पॉज करके. In both India and Pakistan, the contribution of agriculture to GVA were 16 and 24% respectively, but the proportion of workforce that works in this sector is more in India. In Pakistan, about 30% of people work in agriculture, whereas in India it is 46%. 24% of Pakistan workforce is engaged in industry, but it produced 19% of GVA. In India, industry workforce account for 25% but produced goods worth 29% of GDP. In China, industries contribute to GDP at 39 and employ 32% of workforce. In all the three countries, service sector contributes highest share of GDP. अब ये पढ़ेंगे अब